Thank you, Ann. I see that word has gotten out that Charlie was not going to be here tonight. As you all noted, he mentioned this morning that he had been a bit under the weather, and Charlie, being the pastor that he is, he put his game face on this morning. When I saw him in my office, I was greatly concerned that I was going to have to preach this morning. He said, "No, I can go this morning." But he was much more under the weather than he appeared to be to you all. And so as he continued to feel a bit ill, we sent him on his way to get in bed and get healed up. He will be here tomorrow afternoon if you have need of seeing him. But you get maybe the second or third team tonight. So hopefully God will use His Word and the feeble efforts that we put forth, and we'll get something out of it. But it wouldn't be Valentine's Day if we didn't sing about and preach a little bit about love. So with apologies to the Beatles, I really thought about downloading it. The working title of our message today is "All You Need Is Love." And I want to look at some very familiar passages that you would expect to hear on a message about love. But as Valentine's Day comes around on a Sunday so infrequently, I just couldn't help but take advantage of it. We are going to end up in 1 Corinthians, as you might suspect. But I wanted to look a little bit at another passage in 1 John 2, in fact. 1 John 3:16 and then 1 John 4:9. 1 John 3:16 says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers." You know, this is one of those passages that we tend to camp out at the cross, and it is entirely appropriate to do so. But I think that John also had in mind another thought when he wrote these words, not only Christ laying down His life, literally dying for us, but we remember that Christ laid down His life when He stepped out of heaven, out of that time at the right hand of God the Father, and His sacrifice started long, long before the cross, because He gave up so much in order to be here, live and walk on this earth, and pay the price for our sin much longer before He actually went to the cross. And so I think that the idea of laying down our lives, in verse 16, the second part of this, you note John doesn't say, "And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers if we are called to do so." And that leads me to consider that not only certainly we would lay down our lives physically, give up our lives for a brother, but John is indicating, at least in part, the idea of setting aside, as Christ did when He stepped out of heaven, our best, our wishes, our desires for what is best for the brothers and sisters. And I see some of our eminent theologians in the audience, and I hope I am not butchering this text, but I would suggest to you that oftentimes it is a much more difficult thing to do, to set aside our wants, needs, and desires because we love a brother or a sister and put their needs and their best ahead of ours. So we know what love is because Christ laid down His life for us. And then if we look across in chapter 4, verse 9, it says, "This is how God showed His love to us." John tells us what love is, and then he tells us how God showed it. He sent His one and only Son into the world that we might live through Him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. And so, if we accept these two examples of what is love and how God showed it to us, then we are led certainly to the place of, okay, Christ laid down his life for us and God sent his Son for us. So what does that mean to us? And that leads us to the very familiar passage, which will be the focal point of our message today in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And we're going to read the entire chapter. It is not a long one, but I think it bears some examination. And Brother Greg is all too familiar with, whenever I tell him on Wednesday nights we're going to be brief tonight, that usually means that choir doesn't start until 7 o'clock because the preacher won't close his mouth. But I really do believe that, Greg, we will be brief this evening, and we're going to spend just a little bit of time here and then be on our way. I want to look first at a little bit of chapter 12 leading up to this. In verse 4, we read, there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit, different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but the same God works all of them in all men. Now to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. You know, I've seen a lot of people get hung up on spiritual gifts as this is my gift, and even to the point where the church that God has led them to be has a need that they can fulfill, and they will use a particular study of spiritual gifts to say, well, that's not my gift, so I can't do that. And that's the cop-out. That's kind of like saying, well, I'll pray about that, which means I'm going to go home and I'm going to look for every way to say no because God's knocking at the door of my heart saying, you need to do this. But if you say, I'll go pray about it, well, we can't argue with that, and so it gives us time to think up a good excuse usually. But they're given for the common good. And then I want us to skip down, and I would encourage you to look at all of chapter 12. Wonderful teaching there. Verse 13 begins, and now I will show you the most excellent way. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender to my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.